Imagine this. You're deep in the woods, surrounded by the sounds of nature, when suddenly something feels off. Tonight, we're diving into 3 terrifying camping encounters from Reddit that will make you question what really lurks in the shadows. But before we jump in, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a chilling story. My family lived in Washington State. Our house had this huge backyard that was surrounded by woods on all sides. It was just over 2 acres and had enough open grass to play any sports we kids wanted to. I had my friends over pretty often since I had the best backyard for us to play in. It was a Friday in the summer when I was in maybe the 6th or 7th grade. My friends and I wanted to have a camp-out sleepover in my backyard. I was a Boy Scout, so I had just learned how to put up a tent on my own and wanted to show off my skills. We had a couple of tents at the house, so Andrew, Mike, and Nick came over at around 5 p.m. after getting permission from their parents to spend the night. I remember the time because we wanted enough daylight where we still had hours to play in the yard for building a fire and heading off to sleep. My parents ordered pizza for us after we had played for a few hours, and then we built a fire in our fire pit. The sun was starting to go down, and so it was time to set up the tents before it got too dark out. We got the tents up fairly quickly because my friends kind of helped, but I remember doing most of the work. By the time the task was done, it was pretty dark out in the backyard, but our outdoor lights were giving off a nice glow, which made it perfect for our purposes. It was now dark enough for us to play our favorite game, Manhunt. I know this is a game that maybe other people haven't heard of, so think of it as hide and seek, but done in pairs or teams. There were tons of spots to hide in the backyard, so we played in duos. It was Mike and myself hiding first, and Andrew and Nick would be the ones hunting us. Mike and I split up. Our goal was to be able to get back to home base without getting found out by our friends. Home base was the blue tent. You actually had to hide away from home base. No camping nearby would be allowed. We had this trampoline that was in the far corner of our yard, just before the edge of the woods, so I crawled under that to hide. When the hunters would start looking, they had to blow a whistle to let the hiders know that they were beginning. Once I heard the whistle, I stayed under the trampoline, waiting it out, watching the 2 of them off in the distance looking around. I was waiting for a good moment to start my creep back towards the blue tent. I had my sights on the fire pit, which was pretty close to the base. If I could make it over to the fire pit unseen, I could beeline it for the tent. So when both Andrew and Nick had their backs to me, looking in different areas of the backyard, I sprinted towards the fire pit. And just as I landed behind it, I heard one of the trash bins alongside of our house almost topple over. I noticed our motion detecting light on the side of the house turn on as well, but I hadn't seen anyone come out of the house to trigger that light. I went to peek around the corner to the side yard, and that's when I saw a tall man dressed in dark clothes speed walking away in the direction of the woods. Just as I was thinking about investigating further, my dad came out and called us all in for ice cream. We suspended the game of Manhunt, put out the fire, and headed into the house through the back door for some sweet refreshment. Once we got inside, I told my dad about the side light being triggered. My dad went out into the yard and looked into the woods, but didn't see anything on that side of the house. He went around to the front yard to check for people on our property, weird cars, or anything of the sort, but he didn't see anything there either. My friends and I enjoyed the ice cream. Then we went upstairs to play PlayStation for a bit. My dad eventually came into my room and told us that it might be a good idea to sleep inside tonight after the side light went off and I saw that man walking around. We were bummed since we had already put up the tents and had planned to sleep outside. My friends and I talked about just going back outside and sleeping in the tent since they were already set up anyway. And plus, what were the odds that whoever that was still out there hours later? Once my folks were asleep for the night, We quietly crept outside, doing our best to not wake them. We weren't exactly hiding the fact that we were going back out there, but we didn't want to advertise it either. We each had a sleeping bag. Mike and I shared a tent, while Andrew and Nick shared the other. After a while of joking around and yelling things between tents, we started to quiet down and eventually tried to go to sleep. I wasn't asleep yet, but as I think back, it seems like Mike was. I started hearing walking sounds in the grass, approaching the tent, and then the zipper to the tent was unzipped. I looked up and saw my dad in the darkness peering inside the tent. He said, "What are you guys doing out here?" I replied to him something like, "They wanted to sleep out here, so we came back out." But as my eyes adjusted, I took a closer look at the face looking down at me before realizing that it wasn't my dad at all. It was some complete stranger. He looked like he was leaning down to come in when I screamed bloody murder and woke each one of my friends up, as well as probably half the block. Mike began to scream as well. The man grabbed both of our ankles and uttered, "Be quiet." But as our porch light shot on and the back door swung open, he gave up when he realized he was about to be exposed. He backed away from the tent in a hurry and rushed off into the woods. We all bolted up to run inside the house, just as my dad was making his way out the back door in response to our screams. I told him that I didn't know which way the guy went, but that the man from earlier was back. My dad ran around the yard, screaming and taunting the creep to come back, but we didn't see him again. We all went inside and called the police. Once the police got there, they didn't really do much of anything other than take a report and advise us that we shouldn't sleep outside anymore. We all got a stern talking to by my parents about how they had told us to stay inside, that we were lucky, and we were probably done camping out for a while. They were right, because after my parents spoke to Mike, Nick, and Andrew's parents about what had happened, even sleeping over inside was off the table for a while. It was dumb of us to go against what my parents had said, but I'm pretty sure we all remember times when we thought we knew better than our adults, or were just trying to be sneaky and didn't care. This was the night that mindset almost resulted in me or one of my friends paying dearly for thinking that we knew better. I sometimes wonder what that guy was up to, but that thought gives me shivers. And then I do my best to put it out of my head. I'm a grown adult now, 2 kids of my own, and we still live in Washington. Given this experience, I'm hesitant to even let my kids play in our backyard alone sometimes, so I don't think we'll be having any backyard camping sessions until they're much older. In my late teen years, I worked the night shift at a campground. One summer, my shift was from 12 a.m. to 8 a.m. Basically, because everyone was sleeping for a majority of my shift, my job was mainly to be present in the event that there was ever an emergency. It was a pretty easy job, so most of the time I could scroll away on my phone or play video games to keep myself awake. My very first night on the job, I was paired up with a guy who had just put in his 2 weeks' notice. One of his final official duties was to train me. He gave me the lay of the land, told me where security cameras were located, the main responsibilities of the position, and who to call if there were ever a reason to call anybody. Towards the end of his whole speech, and almost offhandedly, he told me about the pay phone nearby on the property. This was in 2016, so the idea of a pay phone already seemed ancient to me, as I could only ever recall seeing a handful of them in my life. I had all but tuned him out until he said that this phone rang every night at 2:17 a.m., and it had for as long as he worked there. He said that it kind of unnerved him the first few nights he heard it, but after a while, it began to be something that was easy to just pass off as background noise. Funny enough, there was no story as to why it rang, just that it did, which piqued my curiosity more than just a little bit. My training came and went. This guy's final 2 weeks went as well. And the next thing I know, it's my time up in the show. I was the main guy on site until about 6 a.m. when non-overnight camp workers began to file in. Nights themselves were pretty boring, if I'm being honest. Most of the time, I'd simply sit at my post doing monotonous things, doing my best to will my eyes to stay open. But I'd be damned if at every night, at exactly 2:17 a.m., that damn phone would ring. Even tucked away in the camp office, during the silence of the night, I could hear it ringing out near the parking lot. The first few times it jolted me awake, but after a while, it became expected. Most nights, I just let it ring and tried my best to ignore it. Easy enough, because whoever was on the other end only called one time, so it would fire off about 8 rings total. And that was it for the night. I'm now about a month into working there. It was smack dab in the middle of summer, and even in the dead of night, it was still excruciatingly hot out. So I began to make a habit of opening one of the office windows to get cool air into the building. But because the window was now open, the payphone was much louder than it usually was. Almost annoyingly so. I think that may have been what pushed me over the edge. I decided then that I was going to answer it. I set an alarm for 2:15 a.m. so I could walk out a couple of minutes before it was set to go off, and I could answer on the first or second ring. To this day, I'm not really sure what I was expecting. Part of me just wanted whoever was on the other line, someone who hadn't gotten a response before, to be surprised when they heard me say hello. Like clockwork, the phone rang right at the stroke of 2:17. I answered it, and before saying anything, I listened. There was no sound, just dead air. Like there was someone on the other line, but they weren't saying anything either. I eventually said hello, as I had planned to do. I even said it 3 or 4 times when I didn't get a response, before finally hanging up. For all the build-up that I had mentally placed on this moment, it was a resounding bust. I decided to do this every night for a week, but always got the same result. Eventually, I stopped thinking anything of it and left it alone after that for about a month, resigning myself to the notion that maybe it was a glitch in the phone company system that made it ring, or some sort of timer within the payphone. I didn't really have a clue though. About a month later, I'm getting close to the end of my contract at the camp. I still hear that phone ring every night, and I'm still a bit curious as to why. I set another alarm, and when the time came, the phone rang, and I answered it once again. I repeatedly said hello into the phone, starting friendly at first, then ending up a bit forceful with my inflection. I figured it was just like before, but right when I moved to hang up the receiver, I heard what sounded like someone laughing. Not so much like something that was funny, but more of something between a chuckle and a scoff. When, out of nowhere, the low voice on the other end of the phone started repeating my full name back to me, over and over again, gradually getting faster and faster with each pass. This not only shocked me, but absolutely scared me out of my shorts. I slammed the phone so hard it made a residual ringing sound in the nighttime air. I couldn't move at first. My heart was beating like I had just run a mile. And that's when the phone rang again. At this point, I was even more freaked, because the phone had never rung twice in a single night. I picked the phone up and hung it up as fast as I could, just to get the ringing to stop. I waited near the phone just to see if it would ring again, but it didn't. After a few moments of calming myself, I reflected on what limited knowledge I had about payphones. I knew you had to insert change to make a call. Duh. I had also remembered hearing my parents say that there was some code that you could input to phones that would allow you to redial a number that had just called you. But what was the code again? After pondering it for a moment, I remembered. *69. I had some change on me, so fueled by curiosity, and perhaps against my better judgment, I dropped a quarter in and hit those 3 keys. After I dialed, there were a few clicking sounds that I heard as the phone tried to connect me, but I was then met by an automated voice. "We're sorry, you have reached a number that has been disconnected or is no longer in service." I continued working at this job till the end of summer, and that phone kept ringing every night at the same time. But never again did I have the nerve to answer it. Almost 10 years later, I still wonder about this. Why every night at 2:17? How did that person know my entire name? And most pressingly, who was that person on the other end of that phone? In the summer of 2019, my girlfriend and I, both in our early 20s, decided to take a road trip to Vancouver, Canada, and then stay at Golden Ears Provincial Park. We liked camping, had spring break, and wanted to do something different, just to make the most out of our vacation. Neither my girlfriend nor I had been out of the US, and it seemed like a crazy, fun, new experience. It was a 6-day trip with Airbnb in each state, and the grand finale was a reserved campsite at Golden Ears, and it was going to be near the water, Alouette Lake. We packed terribly, had a giant tent, brought a bunch of fruit and veggies to eat healthily, stored them in a cooler that was too small, and brought a cutting board and knife to break up the snacks while driving. We started our trek in California, switched off driving our bright red Ford Fiesta. We drove through Oregon and Washington and made it to Vancouver. We spent a day or two in each state, drank just a little too much, and stayed out way too late. Canada was the best part, and Alouette Lake felt like walking in a painting. We walked barefoot on the rocks with our toes in the freezing cold waters. We hiked around, saw a beautiful waterfall where we saw a couple taking pics of each other for almost an hour, and we started modeling the same poses from far away. Everything was just about perfect, and the campsite was empty except for one single other couple. We went to bed early that night. It was quiet until I woke up to crackling outside the tent. My girlfriend was still asleep and snoring away while I heard noises. I tried not to panic. It was nighttime out and likely just an animal running through our camp. But the crackling continued, closer to the tent. That's when I sat up and grabbed my phone. As I picked it up, the blast of my screen, on full brightness, overtook the tent. I did my best to turn it off quickly, but I almost blinded myself with the light. In those 2 seconds, though, I could make out the silhouette of a person right outside of our tent. I sat up and froze. They weren't moving anymore, and they were close enough to unzip the tent. I started poking my girlfriend because I had no idea what to do. She woke up, and I said that there was someone outside of our tent. That's when I hear the footsteps. Quiet footsteps walking away from our campsite. Now my girlfriend starts loudly saying, "What? What?" repeatedly in a sleepy haze. When we fell asleep that night, there was no one near our camping site. The other couple that I alluded to were more than a mile away. But now I hear the sounds of a car engine start up. What sounds like it's merely feet away from our camp. I hear the sounds of it starting to drive off, and I can't help but notice that they didn't turn their lights on until they turned a corner and were nearly out of our view. With that said, even now that I was outside of the tent, I couldn't make out much, but it did look like a truck. Now at this point, I'm shaking, and my girl can't put together what's happening. I want to leave, but Golden Ears locks the gate until 6 or 7 a.m., and it's only 2 a.m. at this point. So, whether we want to or not, we're going to be here. I make us move into the Ford Fiesta and sleep in the packed car. Couldn't it have been a park ranger? She posed. But it seemed too weird of some behaviors for a park ranger. I sit there wide awake in the driver's seat for about 2 hours. The car's locked, and I want to sleep, but I know I can't. I look over at my co-pilot, and she's fast asleep in the passenger seat. It's nearly 3 a.m. at this point. I'm sitting here half awake when I hear a car slowly driving up the road, lights off, as it rounds the corner nearest to us. It had to be the same truck. And I was scared. But my adrenaline was also pumping. It slowly rounds the corner and pulls up directly in front of our campsite. Once again, I feel like I'm going to puke. I had no weapon but the single kitchen knife that we brought for fruits and vegetables. So I grabbed it and tried to make myself look angry, crazy, and big. I sit straight up in the seat, holding the kitchen knife at eye level. I keep it straight and stare deadpan out at this truck in the pitch black, just like the father in the American Gothic painting. The truck stops and shuts off. A light shines directly onto my face, coming from inside the truck. I stare back, and as mad dog as I'm trying to be, I'm terrified, and I'm sure that it shows. While I'm sitting in my bright red Ford, holding up a large knife, not blinking, the truck starts back up, turns on its lights, and they stay on, blinding me as the truck pulls out and turns back around towards where it came. My heart is still pounding. That's when I wake my girl up and say that we need to get the hell out of here. We do a rush pack job by just throwing things into our car and sit there awake until 6 a.m. We drive all the way home. I don't even think we made a stop. We just kept rehashing and trying to make sense of the situation. But after that, went round and round with ultimately no conclusion. It was pretty evident that we just needed some sleep. I think back on that night quite often. The first time the truck drove through, I didn't get a good look at it. But when they came back, even in the dark, it was obvious that it wasn't a park ranger. It wasn't authorities of any nature. Whoever it was had been in the campground since the night before, because like I said, the gates get locked. It wasn't the couple from down the way. I remember seeing their Subaru as we pulled through, not a truck. So that just leaves me wondering even more. Who was that? Why were they in our campsite? And had I not woken up when I did, what would they have done to us in the tent? Wow, those stories were truly spine-chilling. What do you think? Have you ever had a creepy encounter while camping? Or do you have a story of your own that you'd like to share? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed these terrifying tales, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and share it with your fellow thrill seekers. And remember to subscribe for more eerie stories and adventures. Until next time, stay safe out there in the wild.